there are any hiccups in sound or video, please just speak up. Right now, everything's running through the computer, and I anticipate everything will go smoothly. So I'm going to share my screen now, because this is going to be a lot of PowerPoint graphics. And slide. Show from the beginning. Okay. All right. Okay. All right. So today's talk, gas and geopolitics in the Eastern Mediterranean. This is there's a lot of players in this. Just to show some of the flags, some of the countries involved, and this is not a full roster. This is just like the first team, if you will. Greece in the top left, Turkey, Cyprus, Egypt below that, and of course, certainly this topic has gotten a fair amount of play in the news, probably fifth or sixth on a bad day in the region. There's lots of other things going on, but clearly, you know, the military shuffling, the bits that pop up about Libya and France and NATO and Navy, maybe somebody's going to start shooting at each other. So this has been coming on for some years. Back in 2012, I gave a presentation to the North County chapter, Israel and Cyprus, water, gas, and insecurity. And this is just as the reality of what was the scale of the resource was become apparent. And the sun is dawning, and really quite an unexpected this set of discoveries has changed the world for Israel first and foremost. But of course, you put a lot of money on the table between contentious powers and all the history of the region, and there's sure to be back and forth. So during this talk, as briefly as possible, I'm going to go through the gas discoveries themselves, the different countries involved have resources or not on their undersea bed. Under the seabed, talk about production, consumption, and export. Export potentials that get a lot of media play. Nations certainly run wild. That seems to be kind of one of the themes of reality worldwide is, wow, our imaginations are something else, and it's kind of helpful to ground it in reality in order to have a constructive conversation in a turbulent place. Then I'll talk about what are essentially pipe dreams of an undersea pipeline from the East Mediterranean into Europe. I'll talk about Turkey and the Cyprus dispute, which really at the center of really all of the shuck and jive. And I'll talk a bit about the sea and EEZs, and then I'll draw some conclusions at the end. So here we go. Look at using Google Earth at the East Mediterranean would look like if there was no water in it. Down here you have the Nile Delta, just oriented. Israel here on the eastern shore. Lebanon, Syria, Cyprus, Turkey. I have noted here Ceyhan, which is the port, the outlet for the Baku-Tbilisi-Ceyhan pipeline that brings nearly 1 million barrels a day of oil out of the Caspian Sea, out of Azerbaijan to the Mediterranean. Ceyhan is also the outlet for a large pipeline that comes out of northern Iraq from Kirkuk primarily, but also contains now quite a bit of oil from the Kurdish provinces of northern Iraq. So it's a busy neighborhood. Also here, roughly where my cursor is swimming around, is the Incirlik Air Base in Turkey. It's a premier state-of-the-art NATO US airbase, really. Something to keep in mind along the way. Just real quick, here on the right, the Levantine Basin. This is where the action has taken place. Over the last 25 to 30 years, it's become clear that there was the prospect of some very large resources, hydrocarbon resources in the area, and it's come to the reality that it's almost entirely gas. This is not an oil province. This is about gas. There are some deep liquids, some condensates, and some natural gas liquids, very small amount of gas liquids. This is high quality methane, very unusually high quality methane. Here, this Tamar field was the first great discovery in 2009. Israel had some teasers, if you will, in the south, off the just north of Gaza and on shore, on the border with Gaza, the REB field and Noah field. That gave an indication to geologists that there really was something there. There is an Israeli geologist that really had the imagination to see what the evidence that he saw in the oil fields on Sinai, and then further the discoveries, the relatively small, notable discoveries offshore Israel, and along with additional research, came to the idea that there really was some very large reserves offshore. And at Tamar, this was the first real lab. Estimated there was about a 35% chance that they'd find something notable. They were on the order of 100 billion cubic meters. The first well cost $100 million. It's real in the commercial world, even amongst big energy companies. And in this case, it wasn't a big energy company. Noble Energy was the headline outfit in this. An Israeli outfit is kind of held things together in the background, really organizing the opportunity, presented it to Noble. They took it. Some big companies in Houston turned down. Anyways, the discovery turned out to be enormous, really essential on a world scale. And instead of 100 billion cubic meters find, it's over 300. At least 200 of it are recoverable. And this essentially opened the door to essentially energy independence for Israel. Israel's was completely dependent on imported oil, particularly after turning back the Sinai Peninsula to Egypt, and was completely, the power sector was two-thirds plus dependent on imported coal. Imported diesel was big as well. And of course, Israel has got a very large desalination sector. Their water supply depends on it, and desalination is energy hungry. So the discovery of gas in Israeli waters was a game changer. The next year, late in 2010, the Leviathan field was discovered. Nearly it's on the order of 900, a trillion cubic meters. A large portion of it are going to be recoverable, less than 750 billion cubic meters, and maybe 500 billion will be recoverable. This is an export opportunity here. Tamar is overwhelmingly being used to supply Israel's domestic market. Then in 2011, at Aphrodite in Cypriot waters, initially seen to be in Cypriot waters, Cyprus joined the game. And there was great excitement about the future opportunity. It seemed right at hand that this would be Cyprus, a small country, small population, that it would be their ticket to the good times. Now it turns out, and it's is not discussed very much. One, this has been a disappointment geologically, but two, an additional disappointment, if you will, is the fact that this field runs over Israeli waters. The Israeli side, they call it the Yishay. So politically, this is a real challenge. From a business standpoint, they can work it out. Now, I want to point out that these resources are under a mile of water and then 2 miles of seabed. This is expensive engineering to go. To get the Tamar field producing took $3 billion plus. They're still spending money. Leviathan is coming to production. The plan was this year, but with the pandemic, everything's been set back. So maybe next year. Just really quick on Cyprus. So have here the Aphrodite discovery. And then things got very quiet for Cyprus. There were several wells drilled, dry holes, big disappointments, unexpected disappointment. Then in 2015, the Eni Italian company took a creative, imaginative look at the seismic studies and determined that they thought there was a reserve here at Jor in Egyptian waters. And indeed, there was a huge discovery made here with fundamentally different geology. Over here in the Levantine Basin, this is sandstone. And Zor is a carbonate. So international companies went back in, and whoa, in Total here at Calypso made a big discovery, maybe as much as 200 billion cubic meters or more. Then Exxon and their partner Oman Petroleum made a similar size discovery. These are both carbonate. This is totally a new play, as it's called, a new play in the gas world, separate from the Levantine Basin. It's Eastern Mediterranean, but again, the geologies are different. These are flat, extensive fields, and these are essentially towers. Taking a look here at the international players involved, Eni and Total. Eni is a big player in the East Mediterranean. It's one of the more, it's a sharp company run by some very clear-minded and creative, geologically driven leaders, very clear thinkers, not bureaucrats. You got ExxonMobil, which has become a cloudy bureaucratic company. Good luck with that. But they're still a big animal in the world. The Total, a French company. Again, Eni is Italian. Shell, you got Noble Energy here. Noble, earlier this year, over the summer actually, was taken over, bought out by Chevron, which is an interesting development. Chevron's in the gas world, especially in Australia. It remains to be seen. This is not a big addition to the Chevron portfolio, but it may present some political opportunities. Chevron gets more doors open than the guys at Noble, and then Kogas, the Korean gas company. So the kind of a complicated graphic here, and maybe I should not spend a lot of time. The Eratosthenes seamount, you got Cyprus up here, Eratosthenes seamount, the Levantine Basin over here. So what any guys were looking at, rather than seeing flat, they saw tower. So it turns out that the depth, the Jor field is 2,000 feet tower. It's in terms of lateral extent, it's not that large, but it's tall. And it's an enormous gas reserve. And so companies went looking for similar structures. And it turns out that there's a substantial number in Cypriot waters, two of which, the Calypso and Glaucus, have been discovered. But everything's pretty much come to us since the Turks really flexed their muscles. Okay, so just again, coming to the Jor discovery for Egypt, while it's headlined as an 850 billion cubic meter discovery, that's the amount of resource in place. And what matters for these resources that are under a lot of ground is actually how much can you get out. A lot of magical thinking in the world of shale, but similar kind of incomplete thinking, if you will, in the analytical world of oil and gas reserves. And the sands of Leviathan and Tamar flow very, very easily, and carbonates are kind of famous for not flowing so well. They can be tricky, much trickier to work with. And so I have not seen estimates of what Eni and their partners now think recoverable. So still, it's a big resource, deep water. It was $4 billion to start it up. They figured $12 billion for this first phase, starting producing a couple years ago. First gas from Tamar was in 2013, so a little over 3 years to get it up and running. Okay, just want to note here, there is a bit of seabed here off of Gaza that's for the under Palestinian control, and there's actually a resource there, Gaza Marine gas field, maybe on the order of 25 billion cubic meters, but not far from shore, and it's an opportunity that remains untapped. Looking here at the Jor gas processing facility, just massive engineering, very, very expensive. And this is before you get nickel back on your investment. So you're spending a ton of money before you see anything. So there's a lot of risk involved. And, there's not a lot of companies that have, a couple $1 billion just hanging in the bank, even the big majors. So they like to spread their risks out. And so look here at the Jor ownership, and this will get you a little bit of geopolitics here. This is the international energy industry, oil and gas industry. So it's a joint venture between Eni and the Egyptian national company. So the Italians, Eni, they had to share the risk, share the opportunity, but let's share the risk. Sold 30% of the participation to Rosneft of Russia for over $1.5 billion. Rosneft can increase their share. That brings Russia in. And this is business, and you can imagine what you will, but the big energy is big business in Russia, and it's business first, politics. It's money, and that's the ideology of Russia. For just you got to. That's the reality. BP is also brought in, and BP is a nearly 20% holder of Rosneft still. Quite a ride, I'm sure, that they've gone for. Another entity that's involved, Mubadala Petroleum, which is part of the UAE Sovereign Wealth Fund. Mubadala is a name that you want to put away in your pocket. You'll see it more and more and more, particularly as the Israeli UAE normalization process continues. But Mubadala has big money, and they are putting it to work. Just a quick bit on Lebanon. The Lebanese have also had similar dreams as to the Cypriots about what could be. They're in the Levantine Basin, and they'd see all these great discoveries to the south. The geology says that these opportunities continue into their waters. And there was a great deal of buildup to the first well being drilled earlier this year. Total holding 40%, any familiar name holding 20%. Novatek, a big private Russian gas company, they're doing the developments up Yamal. So they've got cash in their pocket, and they have bought into 2 of the licenses off of Lebanon. So the first well was drilled off of Lebanon earlier this year, and it came up dry. They came up with, it was a learning experience. So they learned about the geology, but it was a 60 million well. Not a nickel's coming back. What makes it interesting and relevant politically is that there was this, they've been in a major financial crisis in Lebanon really for the year. It's been coming, but they really got into it this year. And then this summer they had that the fertilizer explosion at the port, and tried to, the largest non-nuclear explosion maybe in history, really wrecked a lot of downtown Beirut. Anyways, the Lebanese government had started counting their chickens before they hatched, and assuming that there was going to be a resource, they assumed that there was going to be resource discovered here, and that the cash would begin to flow. It takes years and a lot of engineering to get the resource flow, but the money can flow fairly quickly with advance payments and all, and I'm sure that that's what was in play. But that really accelerated the financial crisis. This dry well really accelerated the financial crisis in Lebanon, and Lebanon is broke, big time broke. And Lebanon's going to be a kind of a festering sore as the years come along here, because there's not a lot of road in front of them. This opportunity to the south, that's been put on hold now. It will be probably several years before anybody really digs in at Lebanon. One of the interesting things about the Lebanon Israeli offshore border, I talked about this in 2012. Lebanese bureaucrat, state official screwed up and submitted incorrect drawings as to what the border was. And well, here we are. So Israel and Lebanon dispute the offshore, the undersea bed, and this is an issue for Israel. And if you've been reading the papers here in the last few weeks, Israel and Lebanon have begun actual negotiations about resolving this problem. They're not talking about a lot else, but they're talking about this one, and it matters for the Israelis because Israeli gas fields come right up to this disputed area, and there are developments underway, and they would very much want to avoid not just the commercial problems that come with those disputes, but the political problems. Okay, jumping into production, consumption, and export. So Israel, looking back at the turn of the century, did not have didn't use natural gas to any consequence. And you can see a jump in the early years of this century up to maybe 3-4 billion cubic meters. Today they're up over 11, but just got a start. Part of this was those discoveries off of Israel, but really the majority of it was the connection, a pipeline connection to Egypt. Egypt had a lot of gas at the time, and Israel was seen as a premium market, and trade began. Unfortunately, there were people that disagreed with this trade, and that pipeline got bombed on a pretty regular basis. Then as and it's, let's see if I can minimize this. Okay. You can see here on the right graphic, imports and exports. You see a collapse of imports. And so around 2010, and this is as Tamar discovery is underway, is Israelis are becoming aware of just how this great opportunity that's there. I mean, it's real. The relationship with Egypt falls apart. And if you're running an industrial sector, you've got a power sector that you're using gas, you're generating electricity. One thing governments don't like is when the power goes out. That's a problem. That's an immediate political problem. So there was a lot of consternation inside Israel as to how to bridge from the Egyptian, the importing Egyptian gas and depending on the gas produced at home at Tamar. Looking ahead, this is for Israel, this is a significant graphic, and I have to say at this point now, in the gas in the East Mediterranean, this is mostly an Israeli story, and it has been an Israeli story and will remain an Israeli story. It may not be the newspaper story, but as long as Cyprus is indeterminate, and that's going to unfortunately be the case, I think, for a while. Israel is the bird in the hand. This is the real deal. And the Israelis have the resources proven, and this is their anticipation going forward. The blue is electricity generation is rapidly displacing imported coal and diesel. So from an environmental standpoint, this is a plus. In this kind of gas recovery and usage, you do not get the leakage that has dogged the frac shale sector at times. This is highly efficient and very clean in the world of fossil. So you can look out here to the middle of the century. And essentially what Israel has come into concretely is deep into the second half of this century. Israel is set in terms of power generation, heating, cooling at home. Liquid fuels for vehicles, and then there's what degree electric vehicles come into play, and talk about solar and all. But the reality is Israel is well positioned deep into this tree, as having resolved a large part of their energy issue. It was a great strategic vulnerability for them from independence in 1948 up until essentially 2013. Okay, pipe dreams. Tremendous amount of chatter about the possibility of building a pipeline, undersea pipeline that would run from particularly the Leviathan field, and perhaps the Cypriot discoveries would piggyback on Leviathan. We'll talk about that. The idea that came to mind, actually, moving gas export-wise out of the Leviathan, this is a decade old now, essentially. It was a pipeline to Turkey. Turkey is a huge market, and imports most of their gas from Russia or Iran. Although this year, 2020, with really low LNG prices, and the Turks have begun to really make a position in the world of LNG. They're importing a lot of LNG from the U.S. right now. It's just, one way to get Donald Trump's ear is to sign this kind of deal, and it has caught some important years. But with the intervention, Erdogan's intervention, sending a flotilla off Gaza in 2010, really what had been a burgeoning strategic, multi-dimensional relationship between Turkey and Israel. It's an indication of the Erdogan personality. It really blew the Israelis away, very upsetting, and has changed how the Israelis see the Turks. regionally for sure. And while it's on my mind, back at the ranch, quietly the Israelis are telling their various partners and potential partners in the region that Turkey is a bigger issue than Iran. We can deal with that on another day. So just looking at this is the export possibilities. Again, this shaded blue section is the Leviathan area. There were ideas shipping into the Turkish domestic market, shipping through Turkey to the TAP pipeline of gas coming out of the Caspian, Azerbaijan to Europe. This pipeline is completed, essentially. The idea was, it's been floated, is to build a pipeline, this EastMed pipeline over to Italy. In my view, this is not going to happen. It's very expensive. The politics are ugly, and it competes with something that's another bird in the hand. The idea of shipping via pipeline gas to Egypt to be turned into LNG and then shipped out. The two facilities, just another look here at this is as much idea. I mean, this is not pipelines along these straight lines. I mean, it just, who does these drawings, you know? I would love to get a graphic artist to work with some of this stuff. But it's very expensive, at minimum $6 to $7 billion to build this thing. It's the knowledge of the seabed is limited at best. This is in 10,000 feet, 10,000 feet of water. And the initial volume that would go through this EastMed pipeline, 10 billion cubic meters, and maybe they'll expand it to 20. Now, Europe is a 560 billion cubic meter market. So, you know, is this a big deal for Europe? No. Is it a way to diversify risk? Yes. And there are lots of other opportunities for diversification, but let's keep things in perspective. But we're going to come here in a little bit later. Well, you can see these red lines here. These are onshore. This pipe brings gas from Egypt to Israel to be, and gas will come to Damietta and Idku, turned into LNG and shipped out. And it turns out that most of it goes to Asia, but that's what's going to end up happening. There will also be Israeli exports to the Jordanian domestic market and the Egyptian domestic market. But, you know, and pipeline dreams, they do go on. Picture here of the prime minister, an Israeli prime minister in January. The relations, this is a geopolitical item. Relationship between Greece and Israel is very, very close. After things collapsed between the Israelis and Turks around 2010, things got very close between Israel and Greece, and they work together. The Israelis do quite a bit of military training in Greek airspace and waters. It's a very close relationship, and you can tell that these two guys, they know each other well. This is very personal right here, kind of cool. Then classic stodgy leaders stand in front of flags photo. Again, beginning of this year, before the pandemic makes its popular way. They celebrating that they're going to build this pipeline, that they're all behind it. Meanwhile, a few weeks later, there's this East Mediterranean Gas Forum is formed. As another promotional vehicle for gas exports. The East Mediterranean Gas Forum would be Cyprus, Egypt, is Cyprus, Egypt, Israel, Greece, Italy, Jordan, and the Palestinian territories, which is an interesting wrinkle on all of this. France wants to join. The US and the EU have asked for observer status. Notably, Lebanon, Syria, and Turkey are not on this list. Coming back to Israeli exports, this is actually a pretty cool chart. Just in the first gas coming onshore in spring 2013 from Tamar. The first exports were to Jordanian facilities on the Dead Sea. A couple deals, small. The first really big transaction was an export transaction for the Israelis was with Jordan, the Jordanian National Power Company. They're going to sell 45 billion cubic meters over a long term. I don't know the years, but you're probably talking 15 years plus. I believe it's a 15-year contract. That's a big number, 45 billion cubic meters. And then earlier this year, an agreement between the Egyptians and Israelis, 60 billion cubic meters. And another, this is from Leviathan, these two fields here. So they're anticipating these two contracts for a field that is not yet producing, but is about to. This is Israel's big export item. Tamar, again, is primarily a domestic oriented discovery resource. One point that this Dolphinius Holdings Limited, a lot of talk about how this is a private sector company, and we got the Egyptian private sector in working with the Israeli private sector, and that's a great thing. And we've got US and other international private sector companies. Dolphinius Holdings is an Egyptian intelligence front. I mean, I could do an entire talk on this. It's really, really fascinating. Yeah, it's just a registered private company, but it's Egyptian intelligence owned. So this is a state deal. And of course, there'll be plenty of opportunity for pockets to be filled and hands to be shaken. Down here at the bottom, a couple of statistics that are worth keeping in the pocket. The Damietta facility these two LNG facilities were set up by Spanish consortia 6-7 years ago when Egypt was flush with gas. Damietta is around 7.5 billion cubic meters a year, and IDCU 10. So their small quantities are being exported now after essentially coming to a stop for a number of years because domestic supply was not available in Egypt. They're supplying their domestic demand first and export second. That's part of why the Israelis got cut off, not just the bombings, but the Egyptians didn't have the gas anymore. So these facilities are largely unused, and they're built. And it's just a matter of reversing the pipelines and expanding pipeline capacity to existing facilities. This is a whole lot easier than building a pipeline across 1,000 miles of seabed that nobody knows anything about, and involves all the politics of the Cyprus, Turkey, Greece, and everything. The kind of politics company not like at all. So gonna just light green jump in the exports to Egypt, the purple export Jordan, and this is projected production in Israel out to the end of the decade, and there's really not a lot of margin here for additional export. So, where's the resource going to come to fill this pipeline? Again, if you've got the LNG facilities built, it's a much lower risk issue. Now, if Cypriot gas comes on, well, that changes things a bit. It might. Looking at Egypt. So Egypt is a huge country. And in the last 20 years has really gasified the power sector. It's 100 million people plus in Egypt, huge metro area in Cairo. And now that this power sector is gasified, unfortunately, the grasp of the connection to gas electricity, the source, has been a little inconsistent. It was a shortfall last decade. The discovery of the Jor and some new resource in Nile Delta, and the Nile Delta has been the source of most of Egypt's gas. The discovery of Jor has turned Egypt back into surplus. In the middle of the decade, it's anticipated that Egypt runs deficit again. So this is where the export deal from Israel to Egypt comes in, is to fill in this gap. Okay, running into geopolitics and running out of time. So just to bring to mind this term neo-Ottomanism. Neo-Ottomanism is a Turkish political ideology that's promoting a greater political engagement of Turkey back to the regions that used to be part of the Ottoman Empire. And the Turks, like the Russians, are steeped in geopolitics for centuries. An interesting look here. This is the flag of the Ottoman Empire. That's the flag of the Republic of Turkey. This is a look at the lands under the Ottoman Empire control or influence at the high water mark for the Ottoman Empire in 1683. And you see that not only was Turkey, the Ottoman Empire, deep into Europe, southeastern Europe, and into Arabia, but especially along the Mediterranean. And while the Ottoman Empire is no more and is now back to Turkey, roots are still there. I want to just note here that Crete, this is showing it had been part of the Ottoman Empire, and indeed, well, the Ottomans picked up from Venice, and you'll find a lot of Venetian roots. They may be centuries old, but those roots are still noticeable. And again, you'll find those Ottoman roots all around the Mediterranean, and right now they are a factor in the Libya conflict. I want to talk about the Cyprus territorial dispute. So back in 1974, in a different political time, and this is summarized considerably. In early 1974, Greece was under the control of a military dictator, and decided would be to, and the Greek on Cyprus be parties. Supported by the Greek regime. A few weeks later, very shortly thereafter, Turkey invaded Cyprus. Cyprus used to be a mosaic of mix of Turkish and Greek Cypriot and Armenian, and I mean, it's just Maronite, all kinds of peoples. And the result of this intervention was to sort people out, and has created a a divided island. The southern part of the island, populated primarily by Greek Cypriots, and the northern part of the island is the Turkish. Later on, as the EU, also interestingly enough to point out here, there are two bases. The UK has two military bases. These are sovereign territory UK, and they've got a magnificent electronic listening post up on Mount Olympus. So they're able to track pretty much everything that goes on in the East Mediterranean electronically. The little details from the past. So after the Cold War was over and the European Union really expanded east, somebody got the idea that it would be really cool for Cyprus to be part of the European Union. And so Cyprus would and joined the European Union. The problem is it was still a divided island. As I look back on it, this is a huge mistake for everybody involved. It may have been fun, convenient, opportunity for a party, lots of handshakes, but it embedded a problem. And I was on a conference call, a video program. Oh, I'm having a brain fade here, but just in recent weeks, Cyprus had refused to support EU sanctions against Belarus, and it was because of the pressure that Turkey was putting on Cyprus and the offshore zones, essentially holding Cyprus hostage. And so the Cypriots turned around to hold the EU hostage and said, we're not going to support you until you really support us. And I was on this conference call with the former foreign minister of the EU, the Italian lady Mogherini, and I said that as long as the Cypriot issue was unresolved, this was going to be a problem for the EU. I just wrote that in the comments section. He jumped on it and said that, well, there's no problem. The northern part of Cyprus is occupied by the Turkish army. Turkey is the only country in the world that recognizes this republic. De jure, by law, this is a unified country, but in fact, it's not. I'm running out of time here. Okay. This is a really convoluted scene that has gotten complicated by a recent election in Cyprus. Turkey is not satisfied with their EEZ claim in the Eastern Mediterranean. They want a portion. They claim a portion of the Cyprus, Turkey, not Cyprus, not the northern guys in the purple here. Turkey wants of it. Northern Cyprus thinks they have this. This is what they claim. So far, no gas discoveries are impacted by this, but the sharing of the wealth is. And now there's a new government in the self-declared Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus. This fellow Esrin Tatar was just elected over the weekend with heavy support from Erdogan, unusually heavy support. Very much a nationalist fellow. For some years, easily for 15 years till 2017, there were a number of efforts to resolve this dispute on Cyprus, but they just could not get it across the finish line. You could blame obstinance on Turkey. You could blame obstinance on the Greeks. You could blame obstinance on the different leaders on the island themselves. This fellow Tatar is backing separate sovereign administrations. He's not looking for some sort of deal, some sort of bizonal, bi-communal federation where, you know, we're in this together. Looking for sovereign administrations, and this is the road to no deal, to gridlock in Cyprus. This is this is publicly a factor for this EEZ issue between Greece, between Turkey and Greece, is a factor for the Turkish regime. Certainly, I listened to a talk with the Turkish ambassador to the U.S. A couple of weeks back, and I asked a question about this, and it was actually part of the conversation. Looking here at this, this is from The Economist, and you can go back and look at it, and you could spend 15 minutes trying to figure this out. There's so much information, so many different overlays. Just suffice to say that this light blue line that drifts along, this is the current accepted Greek zone. It's what the Turks are claiming. This island, a group of islands at Castellarizo, is rolled out time and again by the Turks as, well, we just can't have Greece controlling all of the seabed right off of Turkey. Another look at the disputed zone here. This top perspective. The bottom map is from the Turkish perspective. Then throw into the mix at the end of last year a deal between the UN recognized regime in Tripoli, the GNA, and Ankara, an undersea EEZ deal. This is like throwing a cat amongst the pigeons, as far as I see. These are all negotiating business. And more negotiable obstacles keep getting thrown into things. At this point, there's no resource here. There might be. There is at least 500 billion cubic meters of resource in southern Cyprus, quite possibly more. It'll be expensive to get out, but it's not going anywhere as long as these waters are held in question. This is another one of those negotiable issues. This is more around the divided island of Cyprus. And this is more the almost Ottoman geopolitical play, putting a in the Greeks' eye, throw in the French as well. But the Turks are essentially demanding a seat at the table, that there be a table, and they want a seat at it. So these presentations are a learning experience for me as well. I got in yesterday to research Castellarizo. You know, it's all, you see all these maps, and it turns out this is a fascinating spot. It turns out that from the breakup of the Ottoman Empire, the years after Treaty of Lausanne and onward, this group of islands was held by the Italians, who ultimately turn it over to the Greeks. These islands are almost a stone's throw from the shore of Turkey. But it's a group of islands. It's not one. Offshore opportunities are a factor to the southwest of Crete, but so far nothing in the waters that that are disputed now between Greece, Libya, and Turkey. But something to pay attention to. The Greeks and the Italians reached a deal earlier this summer, very contentious because of the fishing rights. Energy is not the only thing under the sea. There's things that are in the sea, and one is the EU and working Brexit out with the British. One thing gets hot politically, and fishing. Wow. The UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, coming back to this dispute between the Greeks and the Turks. Well, between the Turks and the Greeks. The Greeks liked the war, and the Turks are trying to change it. It's interesting that looking at the Mediterranean here, in red, these are the countries law of the sea: Turkey, Syria, and Lebanon, and Israel. The law of the sea for signatories, certainly, and the U.S. is not a signatory, by the way, marks out the exclusive economic zone. It marks out territorial waters, contiguous waters, exclusive economic zone waters, and continental shelf issues. This ties in with like the Lomonosov Ridge under the Arctic Sea, and the pushing and shoving between Russia, Denmark, and Canada. This is something to spend some time on your own looking into. This is a big issue for the 21st century. It's a big deal in the South China Sea, something you want to get familiar with on your own. Just to the conclusions here, and then we can do Q&A, and we can come back to some of these slides that you may have found interesting that I didn't talk about. Firstly, the East Mediterranean gas discoveries. These are a generational breakthrough, a strategic breakthrough for Israel. It changed everything for Israel. And that's the fact for the 21st century. The exports are deepening relations with Egypt and Jordan. Israel has peace treaties with both of these countries, not just normalization, but peace treaties. And my view is that resources, as they are developed, not just the Leviathan exports, but also exports that could be resources that could be developed in Cypriot waters, that gas will tie into infrastructure that's developed for Leviathan and perhaps tomorrow, but particularly Leviathan. It'll tie into that infrastructure and flow south to Israel and then over to Egypt, either to be used in the Egyptian domestic economy or turned into LNG for export. Since the pipelines, a lot of the infrastructure already exists, it's a lot easier to lay down new infrastructure to parallel existing infrastructure than to do something greenfield. If it turns out that there's a lot of gas and it's going to be there for a long time, the LNG facilities in Egypt could be expanded. But I think that the regional demand will be such, along with the capacity at Damietta Itku, that's where the gas is going to go. Cyprus is in a political jam. Resolving the political divide on the island is crucial to resolving this logjam of affecting producing gas from Cypriot waters. Turkey's case for redrawing the EEZ is limited. Again, coming back to the group of islands there, this is going to be a political issue to be resolved between the Turks and the Greeks. And the reality is they don't get on very well. This is This is a challenging relationship. When two ships of the Greek ship and Turkish ship ran into each other in August, both countries worked really hard to keep it quiet. So there are some cool heads in the room, but Mr. Erdogan has really earned a reputation of being a rather dynamic fellow and willing to do say and do the unexpected. I do think that in order for this to work out, ultimately the Greeks are going to have to be magnanimous, and it ultimately is to their benefit. It will be kind of a bitter thing to do, but I think ultimately Greece and certainly the Greek part of Cyprus will be the big benefit of Cyprus. It's really unfortunate the EU brought in Cyprus as a unified island when in fact it wasn't. That membership in the EU was a real lever to solve a problem, but it wasn't handled. Meanwhile, neo-Ottomanism, that wave is still rising, not just in the Mediterranean, but elsewhere. It is important to pay attention to the capability of the Turkish military industrial complex, both in terms of developing a domestically constructed navy, which they are doing, but also drone and air power. So neo-Ottomanism is something to continue. I suspect it'll be there without Mr. Erdogan. The reality is the Cold War ended. A lot of things changed. Many of us are insisting on retaining the old models, the old frameworks from the era of the Cold War, which in a way kept the consequences of the breakup of the Ottoman Empire that really never really worked through, nor is the breakup of the Austro-Hungarian Empire really well understood. It blows my mind, the military and NATO people that just are without a clue as to the history of the region and the consequence of the breakup of those empires. This is not just like turning the page in a book. So thank you very much for your time, questions and answers, hopefully answers. Thank you.
Okay.